Hey Genderqueer Chat, it's Matt, and this week's topic is viewer's choice. So we put out the call out there for all you viewers to put forward any suggestions of topics that you'd like us to cover. And we got a couple through the door, and the one that we're talking about this week, or the one that I'll be talking about this week, is to do with genderqueer and location. So what's it like being genderqueer in your city or country? What are people's perceptions, or what are people like in regards to gender in the place you live? And what are your perceptions of other cultures and how they view gender or being genderqueer or trans in other places? So as I've said in other videos, like I come from Australia. I come from one of the states of Australia, which is the island state of Tasmania, down the bottom. And we have a pretty small population. I come from the capital city, but I guess in relation to other places, probably still a small community, small population. We do have a fairly large queer component to that community, or at least a large visibly queer sort of community there, which has been fantastic since I've come out as genderqueer and sort of exploring that side of things. Definitely good having a community there which is somewhat akin to how I'm feeling, shares certain interests or identifying in a similar way. Certainly good to have that community there. So as far as I can see, there is a fairly large queer component to our population, and that's visible. There is, of course, we have gay nightclubs, and there's all sorts of queer events going. We have like a regular event in our city for it's a queer and alternative party, as I think I've mentioned before, and that's a pretty good thing. And there is services available for people who are struggling with gender or sexuality issues. That's probably the only visible place where I see gender or genderqueer. I have to say I've only come across one other person in my city or my state that identifies as genderqueer. So I've met quite a few trans people through going to trans meetings and people who identify on at some place in a trans spectrum, but I've only ever come across one other person who uses the term genderqueer to describe themselves. So I'm not sure what that's saying about the place I live. Certainly I feel like there's not a big genderqueer community or a gender variant community, so that's something that is a bit of a something that could be improved. But yeah, certainly there is that queer community, and that's a good thing. At least with that, you know that there is a bit more acceptance, a bit more understanding, and while gender or transgender or genderqueer can usually come under that broader queer umbrella, even though it's maybe the invisible component of it, at least that's there. So there is a place where people can go. So as I said, I go to trans meetings. I have been to trans meetings, and I met people through there. So there's definitely a trans presence and a gender variant presence in my state and in my city. You don't see it out there. The people that I have met, I'm guessing that this group is probably their only outlet, so the only place where they can go, where they can really feel accepted and safe and be able to talk about the things they need to talk about and share their experiences. And the organisation that runs those meetings deals with sexuality and gender, and there's a few of them dotted around the state. So Hobart's one of them, of course, and yeah, it's good that they've got that. I think probably one of the positive things about the place where I live is, even though it's a small state with a small population, it's really only a stone throw away to the bigger suburban centres, so Melbourne and Sydney, which are cities you've probably heard about. And as I said in a previous video, I actually got to go to the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras earlier this year. So I flew to Sydney and went to the Mardi Gras, and yeah, you don't get much more queer than that. Once again, I didn't see too much genderqueer representation or transgender representation. So while sexuality, gay, lesbian stuff is out there and is in the public eye, in the media, and being discussed and addressed and supported, gender stuff still isn't really there. I mean, I don't think that's going to be any different here to any other major city in a modern Western world. I can't imagine there's too much difference. Maybe different levels of sort of tolerance or different levels of support. But yeah, I don't know. I feel quite lucky to live here. I mean, it's a great state and a great country, and the support that I have got and the access to the community that's there is at least something. And I would really feel sorry for somebody, or feel sorry for myself if I was in the position where I lived in a town or a city where I didn't have access to those things, where there wasn't a visible queer community, or there wasn't a place where people would go and discuss sexuality or gender and get the support they need like they can here. In regards to how people perceive gender, it's one of those invisible things. I don't think transgender or genderqueer issues are openly talked about or addressed. They're not. It's not something that the majority of people are even aware of. And to be honest, like, I was in that same situation. I was fairly ignorant to transgender issues. Certainly, ignorant of genderqueer issues as well, until I started to really examine myself and identify that way. And I think that's what the majority of people think. I think maybe thinking about gay issues and equality and gay marriage is probably the total extent that people have gone to in even looking at these sort of things. So yeah, I don't think non-binary gender or gender variance is even on most people's radar. So of course I don't really present in a very non-gender specific way. So for me, I don't experience any kind of discrimination, or I don't get funny looks or anything. I'm not visibly genderqueer, you could say, or visibly queer even. So I don't really know firsthand what that's like, whether or not this place, this city is tolerant of that, or how people who are like that, what kind of experiences they have. But yeah, it's it feels like a pretty good place to live. So I don't think I'd live anywhere else. Certainly room for improvement, and hopefully that will happen. Bigger communities, more awareness. But I would hazard a guess and say that living in this city probably isn't that much different to living in any other major city in Australia. Smaller population, smaller scale, but same level of I want to say ignorance, but I don't mean it in that sort of way. Same level of invisibility, or just, unawareness, if that's a word, of gender-related things. Other cultures, I know that other cultures do have differing views of gender, and it would be nice to think that there's a place out there, a country or a city, where genderqueer people or trans people were accepted and honoured and revered. In reality, though, I mean, lots of different countries and different cultures, and I know that gender is a pretty big issue in a lot of countries. There's struggles there with gender equality between the binary sexes. So while there may not be a lot of gung-ho, go-forth, gender variance stuff where I live, I think it's a lot better than maybe it could be living in another country where you may be persecuted or face discrimination or worse for being visibly gender variant. So yeah, so great topic. I'm not sure who the viewer was who mentioned that, don't know their name, but thank you very much. That was a fantastic topic, and we'll certainly be doing the viewer's choice things again. So if you do have any questions, as I said last week, keep them in your head, and when we announce a viewer's choice, feel free to let us know, and maybe your question will be chosen. There was a second part of the question this week, or a second question to do with the model. I can't even remember their name, and I'm sorry for the person who suggested that question. I don't actually know anything about that person. I did see some photos that the others were emailing around, but and they're certainly a very attractive individual, and I think it's fantastic that there's somebody out there who is gender variant or androgynous, and in such a high profile thing like that, like modelling. I think that's great, and I don't know anything about them personally though, so I'm not going to discuss that today. But yeah, thank you everyone, and we'll see you next week.